The gunshot echoed across the parched valley floor, sending Katherine Larkin racing through the blistered landscape as the relentless afternoon sun beat down on her back. Her lungs burned as she pushed her legs harder, the memory of what she'd just witnessed driving her forward even as her throat went raw from desperate screams for help that no one would hear in this desolate stretch of Wyoming Territory. 1878. 3 days earlier, Katherine had been traveling west with her brother and his wife when their stagecoach was ambushed. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed hard among the scrub brush, but still she crawled forward, her fingers digging into the dirt as she dragged herself toward a cluster of boulders. The rider appeared at the ridge above, silhouetted against the burning sky. She tried to scream again, but only a raspy whisper escaped her parched, ruined throat. Her voice was gone, stolen by hours of terror and desperate cries that had fallen on the empty desert. The stranger dismounted, approaching cautiously with his rifle at the ready. Katherine pressed herself against the rocks, waiting for the end. "You don't need words to be heard here. I can see plain as day you're in trouble." He extended a calloused hand toward her, and after a moment's hesitation, Katherine took it. "Name's Bryce Kendrick. Got a place about 3 miles east of here. Let's get you somewhere safe, and we can figure the rest out after." Katherine nodded weakly, grateful tears streaming down her dirt-stained face as the cowboy helped her to her feet and toward his waiting horse. The journey to Bryce's homestead passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion for Katherine. She clung to his back as they rode, her throat burning with every breath. The small cabin appeared on the horizon just as the sun began to dip below the mountains, a humble structure with a corral for horses and a small garden plot beside it. "It ain't much," Bryce said as he helped her down from the saddle, "but it's safe." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace occupied one wall, a small kitchen area another. A wooden partition separated what she assumed was his sleeping area. Bryce guided her to a chair at the table and set about heating water. "You'll be needing this," he said, placing a slate and chalk before her. "My sister went through something similar after a fever took her voice for a spell. This helped her communicate until it came back." Katherine's fingers trembled as she wrote. "Bandits. Stagecoach. Family dead." Bryce's jaw tightened as he read the words. "When? 3 days ago. Near Cottonwood Pass." "I know the spot," he said grimly. "Been trouble on that stretch for months now. Sheriff Hobbs can't seem to get a handle on it." He poured a cup of warm water and added honey. "This will help your throat. Rest now. Come morning, I'll ride to town, let the sheriff know what happened." Katherine nodded gratefully, sipping the soothing liquid as Bryce prepared a simple meal. The warmth of the cabin and the first sense of safety she'd felt in days made her eyelids heavy. Before she knew it, she was drifting off, her body surrendering to exhaustion. She woke with a start, momentarily panicked by the unfamiliar surroundings until the events of the previous day came rushing back. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Bryce sat at the table, cleaning a revolver. "Morning," he said. "Made some breakfast. You should eat before I head to town." Katherine nodded, moving stiffly to the table. Her ankle throbbed, but the swelling had gone down. She wrote on the slate, "Thank you. No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." She shook her head vehemently and wrote, "Not everyone." Something in her expression must have conveyed the horror of what she'd witnessed, because his face darkened. "No, I suppose not. This territory attracts all kinds, the good, the bad, and those just trying to make their way." He poured her coffee. She found a wash basin and cleaned herself as best she could, grateful to remove the layers of dirt and dried blood. Her throat still burned when she tried to speak, producing only painful whispers. She wondered if her voice would ever return, or if the trauma had taken it forever. The thought brought fresh tears, which she angrily wiped away. She had survived. That would have to be enough for now. By mid-afternoon, Katherine had swept the cabin floor, washed her tattered clothes, and tended to the small vegetable garden. The physical activity helped keep the memories at bay, though they hovered at the edges of her consciousness, threatening to overwhelm her if she paused too long. The sound of approaching riders drew her attention. Bryce returned, accompanied by a stern-looking man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "Miss Larkin," the sheriff said, dismounting. "I'm Sheriff Hobbs. Mr. Kendrick here says you were caught up in that stagecoach robbery. I'm right sorry about your family. Katherine nodded, clutching the slate. I know this is difficult, the sheriff continued, but anything you can tell me about the men might help us catch them. For the next hour, Katherine wrote detailed descriptions of the bandits' 5 men, their appearances, weapons, even snippets of conversation she'd overheard while hiding. The sheriff took notes, his expression growing grimmer. This matches what we know of the Rayburn gang, he said finally. They've been hitting stagecoaches along the territorial border for months. Slippery as eels. He tucked his notebook away. That evening, Katherine helped prepare supper, finding comfort in the domestic tasks. They ate in companionable silence, and afterward, Bryce insisted she take his bed while he made do with a bedroll near the fireplace. I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count, he said when she protested. A roof overhead is luxury enough for me. Days passed in a similar fashion. Katherine's ankle healed, and she grew stronger, though her voice remained a mere whisper. The simple dresses were plain but well made, and Katherine was touched by his thoughtfulness. That night, as they sat by the fire, she wrote, "Tell me about yourself." Bryce looked uncomfortable. Not much to tell. Came west after the war. Tried mining, then cattle driving. Saved enough to buy this place 5 years back. He stared into the flames. War changes a man. Needed the quiet out here. Which side? She wrote. Union. Though out here, it hardly matters anymore. Men from both sides ended up in these parts, looking to start fresh. Katherine nodded. Her own father had fought for the Union as well, though he rarely spoke of it. Before she could write more, Bryce asked, "What about you? What brought your family west?" She wrote about her brother's dreams of starting a sawmill in Oregon, how he'd convinced her to join him and his wife after their parents died of influenza the previous year, how she'd been excited for the adventure despite her reservations about leaving Pennsylvania. "Never been east of the Mississippi myself," Bryce said. "Always wondered what it was like. Crowded," she wrote, smiling, "but beautiful in its own way." 2 weeks after her arrival, Bryce announced he needed to make a supply run to town. "Should be back tomorrow evening. You'll be all right here." Katherine nodded, writing, "I'll be fine." After he left, she busied herself with chores, but the cabin felt eerily silent without his presence. That night, she struggled to sleep, startling at every sound from the surrounding wilderness. When exhaustion finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with the screams of her family and the cruel laughter of their killers. She woke to the sound of approaching horses just after dawn. Relief flooded through her. Bryce was back earlier than expected, but as she moved to the window, her blood turned to ice. 3 riders approached the cabin, and even at a distance, she recognized one of them from the stagecoach attack. Katherine's mind raced as she grabbed Bryce's spare revolver from the shelf. She'd never fired a gun before, but had watched her brother at target practice enough to understand the basics. Moving quickly, she extinguished the morning fire and positioned herself beside the window, heart pounding. The men dismounted, conferring in low voices. One pointed toward the corral where only Katherine's borrowed mare stood, indicating Bryce wasn't home. "Hello, the house," one called. "Anybody home? We're just travelers looking for water." Katherine remained silent, the revolver heavy in her hands. "Come on out. We don't mean no harm." When no response came, the men exchanged glances. The one she recognized, a bearded man with a distinctive scar across his cheek, drew his gun. "Check inside, Pete. Could be something worth taking." As the man called Pete approached the door, Katherine steadied her breathing. Katherine heard the crack of breaking glass as he attempted to enter through the back window. Desperate, she fired in that direction, hearing a yelp of pain in response. "You shot Jim," one of the others yelled. "You're dead, you hear me? Dead." The intensity of their assault increased. Bullets thudded into the cabin walls, one narrowly missing Katherine's head. She was down to her last few rounds when the distant sound of galloping hooves reached her ears. The bandits heard it too, their fire faltering. "Riders coming," one shouted. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face as the adrenaline drained from her body. Her hands shook so badly that she dropped the slate when trying to write. "It's all right," Bryce said, gathering her into his arms. "You're safe now." Outside, Sheriff Hobbs and his deputies secured the bandits who had fallen. One was dead, the other wounded but alive. "This one's Eli Porter," Hobbs said, nudging the injured man with his boot. Been wanting him for that bank job in Laramie last year. The one that got away is Sam Rayburn himself. He'll be back, Porter spat, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Sam don't forget a face, and he don't like loose ends. Hobbs bound the man's hands. He can try, but his gang's falling apart piece by piece. He turned to Katherine. Miss Larkin, seems we owe you thanks. Porter here's worth $100 bounty. That evening, after the sheriff and his men departed with their prisoner, Bryce built up the fire and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Never should have left you alone, he said, self-recrimination heavy in his voice. Katherine shook her head firmly and wrote, Not your fault. Safer than most. Katherine considered the offer. A teaching position would provide independence, purpose. Yet the thought of leaving the cabin, leaving Bryce, filled her with an unexpected sadness. These few weeks in his company had awakened feelings she hadn't anticipated. I'd miss you, she wrote finally, her hand trembling slightly. Bryce's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. Liberty Junction's only half a day's ride, he said softly. I could visit. Or, he trailed off, seeming to gather his courage. Or I could come with you. Katherine's eyes widened. Though they lived as neighbors at first, propriety demanded separate quarters until more formal arrangements could be made. Their evenings were spent together, planning and dreaming. As weeks passed, Katherine settled into her role as teacher. To her surprise, her condition endeared her to the children, who quickly learned to pay attention to her gestures and written instructions. Some even began learning simple hand signs to communicate with her more efficiently. Bryce found work at the lumber mill, his strength and reliability making him a valued employee. On weekends, he would take Katherine riding into the surrounding hills, showing her the beauty of the landscape that had drawn him west. One crisp October day, as they picnicked beside a mountain stream, Katherine tried again to speak. To her astonishment, a hoarse but audible word emerged. Bryce. His head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. It's coming back, she whispered, her voice rough but unmistakable. Joy spread across his face as he moved to sit beside her. I told you it would in time. I was afraid, she admitted, each word a victory, that it was gone forever. Would it have mattered so much? He asked. You've made yourself heard just fine without it. Katherine considered this. No, she said finally. But I wanted to be able to say certain things. What things? His voice was gentle, his eyes never leaving hers. Instead of answering, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. When they parted, she whispered, I love you. Bryce's smile was brighter than the autumn sun overhead. I love you too, Katherine Larkin. Have since the moment I found you in that valley. News reached them a week later that Sam Rayburn had been killed in a shootout with a posse near the Colorado border. The last of the gang that had murdered Katherine's family was gone. Though justice couldn't bring her brother back, it provided a measure of closure that allowed her to look toward the future with hope rather than fear. As winter settled over Liberty Junction, Bryce proposed formally, offering a simple silver ring he'd saved 3 months' wages to buy. I'm not a man of fancy words, he said, kneeling before her in their small parlor. But I know what it means to find someone who makes the silence comfortable. Will you marry me, Katherine? Yes, she said, her voice still soft but growing stronger each day. Yes, I will. They were married in the town church on Christmas Eve, 1878, with the entire community in attendance. Katherine's students sang carols as she walked down the aisle, and when it came time to speak her vows, her voice rang clear enough for all to hear. The following spring, they used Katherine's portion of the bounty money and Bryce's savings to put a down payment on a small ranch outside of town. Close enough for Katherine to continue teaching, but with enough land for Bryce to raise horses, a dream he'd harbored for years. They named their ranch Whisper Creek, a reminder of how their story began with silence that spoke volumes and understanding that transcended words. 5 years later, their home was filled with the laughter of twin daughters and the constant activity of ranch life. Katherine's voice had fully returned, though she still kept a slate handy for the occasional sore throat or moments when words simply weren't enough. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Bryce took her riding to a scenic overlook that provided a view of their ranch and the town beyond. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? He asked as they watched the sunset paint the valley gold. If I hadn't been hunting in that particular stretch that day, Katherine considered the question. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I remember what you told me when you found me. What was that? You said I didn't need words to be heard. She squeezed his hand. You really saw me when I had nothing, not even a voice. Everything we have now grew from that moment. Bryce nodded, his eyes reflecting the fading light. You know, for years after the war, I felt lost. Came out here thinking the silence would heal whatever broke inside me. His voice grew thoughtful. Never expected to find myself by helping someone else find their voice. Perhaps that's how it works, Katherine said. We heal each other. As twilight deepened around them, they rode home side by side, their shadows merging on the trail before them. Ahead, the lights of their ranch house beckoned a beacon of warmth in the vast Wyoming wilderness. What had once been a harsh and unforgiving land to Katherine now felt like home, filled with possibilities as boundless as the western sky. That night, as their daughters slept and the house settled into peaceful quiet, Katherine penned a letter to her former school in Pennsylvania. In it, she described her journey west, the tragedy that had befallen her, but also the unexpected joy she had found in its aftermath. She wrote of the community that had embraced her, of the children she taught, and of the man who had shown her that sometimes the deepest connections form in silence. I came west seeking my brother's dream, she concluded, but found my own instead. In this place where words often feel too small for the landscape, I learned that the heart speaks its own language, one that needs no voice to be understood.